Hello, my name is Taylor Ellis, and I am a PhD candidate at the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Education. I'm here as a graduate student research assistant representing the workload creep research team, in particular, Drs. Sandra Kurtzen, who's a principal investigator, and Drs. Satoru Nakagawa and Marilee Tamtik, who are both members of the research team of the Workload Keep project. I am going to read out here a quick or a modified version of the University of Manitoba's land acknowledgement. We are grateful if uninvited guests on the lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these lands. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and the present, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. In our empirical, conceptual, and theoretical work, and across all our transdisciplinary relationships and entanglements, we embrace Indigenous ways of knowing, critical pedagogies, critical discourses, and reimagined forms of research, ethics, and institutional organizations. We stand in solidarity with all actions and alliances that disrupt systemic and institutional settler colonialism, empire, neoliberalism, anti-Blackness, anti-Asianness, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-LGBTQ plus freedom, and any number of hateful and repressive overt and covert forms of oppression. The title of today's presentation is Buying into Branding, Selling Out the Academy. This research is part of a larger 5-year SSHRC-funded insight grant on the U15 and workload creep. Workload creep in the neoliberal academy refers to the concept of workload increasing over time in a kind of incremental fashion. In some of my interviews that I've conducted for this project, people have described it in terms of a frog in a pot of water being heated over time. It's not a flood of kind of energy and exhaustion. It's just incremental changes in the kind of competitive structure of the university have massive effects over time in the way that faculty construct themselves and relate to their workplaces. We have here linked a website, the workloadcreep.ca. We host our survey data and post our citations as they come available. So if you're interested, you can go there and review that data. The presentation today was looking at U15 websites. We're looking for representations of faculty at work. Examples of this type of research have already been conducted in other places, although they're very few. Particularly in the US and Australia, we found examples, but there really hasn't been much done like this in Canada. We use the construction of neoliberal keywords to organize our thematic analysis, a concept that we're borrowing from Holborough. The rationale for the U15 as our target population is because the U15 is a kind of self-organizing cartel of related kind of medical, doctoral, research-intensive universities. It has regional representation across the whole country, including kind of the Canadian like internationally ranked universities of note, like the U of T and McGill in the UBC, and then other kind of regional or national centers are also represented as part of this collective body who organizes to kind of lobby the government in service of the interests of these institutions on a kind of broader national level. The reason that the U15 is of particular interest here is that since they've organized themselves in the early 90s, they've kind of become this self-fulfilling body who now kind of monopolizes a lot of the research funding, patent licensing, and educational opportunities, especially at the kind of doctoral level, and also just more broadly speaking, with like 40% of university students attending one of these 15 universities across the country. What we see here is an example that was created by Dr. Nakagawa as a kind of an assembly of a whole series of the kind of examples of these keywords that are very common in these self-promotional texts. This is a kind of an exaggerated example because it's a combination of a whole bunch of texts put together, but it's kind of illustrative of the kind of neoliberalization of the university and how it presents itself as this kind of cutting edge extractive body that kind of dominates its environment and promotes this kind of commercialization of knowledge and knowledge promotion. As a method, we use critical discourse analysis, like I've suggested. In this case, what we did is we looked at university websites from July to October in 2019. We looked at the timing here is important because websites are not fixed in place. They can change without any notice to the end user. In our case, we looked first at the kind of landing pages, the home page, and then we deliberately looked for kind of links to subsequent pages that might indicate things related to faculty at work, so teaching, research, etc. We then, after a couple of rounds of this iterative searching, we started to organize what we were finding into these themes, and the structures of these themes were associated with issues of faculty at work. So the idea of the four themes that I'm going to discuss today, where the university is a corporation or corporate entity, and then the faculty as a service provider, university as a machine or pipeline, and then the faculty as a machine minder or tender, and then the university existing within a knowledge marketplace, and then so the faculty exists in that marketplace as kind of knowledge entrepreneurs, and then this concept of the university as a kind of means of discovery or as a vehicle of some kind. The implication there tends to be that faculty and students will leave the institution and lead or dominate their kind of communities and their environments. So here I'm looking at some, or providing you some examples of keywords or key ideas that were found in our survey, our kind of examination of these the websites. So things like commercialization, stakeholders, pipelines, those are all very common kind of metaphorical tools that are immediately apparent in the text themselves. Some of these are more kind of conceptual ideas, like protectionism isn't referenced explicitly, but in the text there's this allusion to the university as this kind of sole provider of access to knowledge, or this kind of monopoly on production of knowledge. And there's also this concept of like a competitive relationship with others, other sites of knowledge production in its own kind of sphere of influence. So for example, the University of Manitoba might represent itself as being the leading provincial research intensive university, kind of promoting itself as being kind of separate from others in this kind of competitive, hierarchical, domineering kind of way. Other examples might use things like being on the forefront or the cutting edge, kind of alluding to this frontiersman mentality of the university is creating kind of scholars and students who will go out and kind of dominate a labor market or something to that effect. And so in the context of a vehicle or a site of discovery, there's this positioning of the university in relationship to the community as like this competitive site of kind of domination in a kind of strange, counterintuitive. The remaining slides in this section are like this one, more functioning as kind of examples that are illustrative of the concepts and ideas that are very commonly reproduced in these self-promotional texts. So for example, here, McMaster University has constructed itself or positioned itself as a research enterprise. Now, that in and of itself may be kind of rather innocuous, but the subsequent text is illustrative of the way that this kind of encroaches into issues of faculty self-determination and governance, where the university in this passage is acknowledging this kind of scarcity model, where it's adopting this notion in order to kind of police and discipline uh, faculty in particular, but through the use of things like data gathering, progress metrics, and things of that nature, um, as a way of kind of uh, uh, constructing for faculty and being rather explicit about what is the kind of expectation of faculty in the conduct of their work as it relates to the institution. The university is a machine. It was a kind of very interesting metaphor for us because machines, are, the way that we understood them as researchers, are kind of function in a way that's kind of detrimental to the human body, or in lieu of the human body, in spaces that are too hot, or the work is too repetitive, or other kinds of ways that work is kind of counter to our physical nature. Um, but illustrating this, these examples from Dalhousie, University of Toronto, especially the idea of a pipeline, they suggest a kind of unilateral, unidimensional aspect to the way that the university is rebranding itself as this kind of pipe that it can force faculty, students, staff, etc., through in order to accomplish some ill-defined aim that at the other end. Um, Pipelines again kind of foreclose on that kind of democratic dual nature of university governance that has kind of been historically established as a kind of a value of the academy. Again, this kind of market metaphor, very common. The idea of the faculty as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is associated with kind of individualism. The university expects that faculty will perceive themselves as being in competition with their colleagues, their friends, their community members. And then finally, this idea of the university as a vehicle is very kind of illustrative of the relationship in particular with the outside world. So it's imagining that the place of the university is to create for the world a kind of a class or a group of people who both as permanent members like faculty and staff, but also students who are kind of transient members of the community, to go out into the broader community that the university serves and kind of become leaders and drivers of innovation and other values that are considered an asset. This whole rebranding exercise for us has been illustrative of this reconstruction of the university, this deliberate reconstruction in terms of competitiveness, hierarchical domination, and strangely enough, a kind of mechanization of the institution of higher learning. We have gone on and done other analyses in the intervening period, looked at things like strategic plans in particular, but are also looking at collective bargaining agreements and other documents that the university is bound by or governs the institution. We also believe that because these texts are kind of self-promotional in nature, self-representational in nature, they have kind of implications for the way that the community perceives itself in relationship to the university. So things like the student becoming the consumer, which is a common trope that's been identified in significant bodies of literature, are being kind of reflected back through these self-promotional texts like the university website in Canada. Here we have our list of references. Most of these are texts that we have published recently. Again, links to these can all be found on our website, workloadcreep.ca. Thank you for your time and consideration.